Yes, you can put POTS into remission. How do I know? Because I did it.
There's strength in finding answers.
I myself have EDS, POTS, and MCAS, and I used to be completely disabled by EDS pain and POTS. Through my journey as a corrective exercise specialist, I put my own POTS symptoms into remission, but then founded a company with a doctor, physical therapist, registered dietitian who specialize in these conditions.
In today's video, I'm going to be going over the 7 steps
that I personally used to put my POTS into remission and that I've seen work for so many of you as well. First, an important note, I don't personally believe that you can cure POTS. Instead, I believe that you can put it into remission or significantly improve it. So I believe that our true power is in understanding this condition, becoming the expert in it, so that if you do deal with it at a different level in the future, you know why and you know what to do about it. That puts so much more of the power into your hands instead of the power being outside of your hands, which only further dysregulates our nervous systems and sends us into a POTS spiral. So this is meant to be imperfect action and imperfect results. We're looking for even small percentages of improvement with each step that we take, and we're taking those small percentages as a win. Because if you get 3% improvement, and then you take your next step and you get 5% improvement, and then with your next step you get 2% of improvement, all of those percentages come together in a larger percentage of improvement. So we're looking for small incremental progress instead of I did one thing and it fixed my POTS, because that's not usually the way that it works. POTS is a complex puzzle, and if you're ready to geek out with me, we can start to dive in and understand that puzzle. So what are we going to be going over in this video? Histamine and its potential effect on your POTS symptoms. Genes, genetic variants might be impacting your POTS. Gut health, nutrient deficiencies, diet, nutrition, and hydration, exercise, and hormones, and how hormones can impact the entire picture and what we can do about that. Nothing that I say in this video is medical advice. This is what's worked in my own experience and what has worked for so many of our clients, but it's not meant for you to take this as gospel. Instead, you can take this to your medical team, get their approval, and see what works best for your body specifically. So let's kick things off with histamine. Why does histamine impact POTS? Now, I'm not just talking about allergies, although that certainly is a part of this. When we have POTS, we also have the likelihood of having other comorbidities come along with it, like hypermobility disorders and overactive mast cells. I'll put the link to a study below on how overactive mast cells can present themselves in a POTS-like clinical picture. In fact, there are 84 overlapping symptoms of MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome, and POTS. Things like tachycardia, low blood pressure, high blood pressure, feeling like you're going to pass out, getting flushed of color, significant fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, palpitations. These might sound like symptoms of POTS, which they are. They're also symptoms of MCAS. You see, your mast cells live inside of your connective tissue and they're next door neighbors to your nerve endings. So when they dump excessive amounts of histamine, which ours can tend to do, they can dysregulate your autonomic nervous system and send basically all systems of your body into a spiral. Now, this is not to say that everybody who has POTS has MCAS or that every case of POTS is caused by MCAS, but it is asking the question, could this be behind the POTS symptoms that you've been experiencing? And that's a question that I asked myself. So for me personally, my POTS symptoms were getting triggered when I would have hormonal shifts, when I would get stressed, when I would get a virus or an infection, or when I would eat certain foods or not eat frequently enough. And guess what the interesting thing is? All of those things can be triggers for your mast cells. Estrogen and progesterone shifts can trigger your mast cells to dump excessive amounts of histamine because your mast cells have estrogen and progesterone receptors. Your mast cells can get triggered to dump excessive amounts of histamine when you get stressed or when you go through trauma. A lot of people have their POTS triggered for the first time when they go through traumatic incidences. When you eat certain foods with histamine, that can trigger your mast cells to dump more histamine. Other things in food can trigger mast cells as well. And your mast cells are related to your blood sugar. So if you look up mast cells and metabolic syndrome, mast cells and blood sugar, you're going to find studies, and I'll link some below, showing the connection between the two. So oftentimes when we don't eat frequently enough, we can also experience symptoms. Now again, POTS is a very complicated puzzle, and so I don't believe that histamine or mast cells are the only piece of that puzzle, nor do I believe that it's a one-size-fits-all. But I do think that it's fascinating, and I think that the question is worth asking, could this be histamine related? And if it is, I like to symptom test personally and see if taking certain steps can improve my POTS because I'm improving my histamine response. For example, I really love a medication called low-dose naltrexone, LDN. It acts as a mast cell stabilizer amongst doing other things. When I take it, my POTS significantly improves. So again, if I'm reverse engineering that, I stabilized my mast cells through one step and I saw a percentage of improvement in my POTS symptoms. So that helps to bring some logic to my own personal picture. The thing about mast cells is that they are complex as well, and they have multiple receptors, meaning that even if you are stabilizing your mast cell at one receptor, you're not stabilizing the entire surface of the cell. So oftentimes we find that it takes many steps to stabilize mast cells. A lot of people ask me, should I take antihistamines? I actually find that a lot of people don't respond great to antihistamines. Some of us, we get resistant to them pretty quickly, and so they stop being effective. And then when we try to get off, we experience withdrawal symptoms. That's my own personal story. Others are actually allergic to antihistamines, and the list goes on. But some people do really well with antihistamines, specifically H1 and H2 blockers combined. So that's something that you could discuss with your doctor for sure. There are side effects to antihistamines though, so oftentimes a lot of our clients like to go down a more natural route, which is why we have a naturopathic doctor on staff, because we tend to deal better with natural solutions. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of us do. Some natural things that can stabilize your mast cells. First and foremost is exposure to the sun, as long as you're not allergic to it, which some of us are, meaning that when you wake up in the morning, trying to get exposure to the sun first thing. So opening up your window and standing in front of it for a little bit, trying to have that be your first thing that you do before you go onto your phone. Also trying to get more sunlight throughout the day. So we're trying to stabilize our circadian rhythm, our internal clock, which is actually the ringleader who tells our mast cells when to dump histamine. So if we can start to stabilize that internal clock, it can help to stabilize our histamine response. Also trying to go to bed around the same time every night and working towards waking up at the same time every morning. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially since a lot of us deal with insomnia and sleep issues, but choosing just one thing to start to work on and then building your way up can tend to help with that histamine issue. Some of us do great with liposomal vitamin C, others don't because we can have oxalate issues, so it's really up to your body with your medical team's approval. Other supplements that can often help, quercetin, PQQ, magnesium. I really like magnesium citrate, but we're all different. And even bromelain. That's a digestive enzyme, so keep in mind some of us won't do well with it. So it's about testing our bodies, taking supplements one at a time, and starting to see what our bodies do well with. And especially trying to pay attention to what makes us feel maybe a little bit better when we take them. And again, medications that you could talk to your doctor about would include LDN, that low-dose naltrexone. There's also cromolyn sodium, which works really well for certain people. And even an old-school H2 blocker called ketotifen works well for some. I don't give you that list to confuse you or overwhelm you, but instead to give you options so that if you find that one of those things doesn't really work for you, you can start to investigate what else might work. As you may know, we have a naturopathic doctor on our team. You can come to live group sessions with her on Zoom, all for like the cost of a latte per month. So if you have further questions about that, please feel free to come to those sessions. I'll link them here in the description as well. Moving on to genes, the genetic variants that might be a part of this puzzle. Many of us have a genetic variant called mthfr. This is a genetic variant that can lead to folate deficiency, so vitamin B9 deficiency. It can make it so that it's difficult for us to process folic acid, the man-made version of B9. So think of all of the processed foods that have folic acid, like bread, like crackers, like a lot of the things that we probably digest naturally. Now, there have been interesting studies that have come out that I'll link below, like the study showing that there seems to be high comorbidities between MTHFR and hypermobility disorders. Also, Tulane University theorizes that there is such thing as folate deficient hypermobility. So it's bringing together the picture that this might be a really big piece of the puzzle for us as far as why these conditions happen in the first place. But another interesting thing about this is that MTHFR genetic variant inhibits methylation. Methylation is a cellular process that's really important for our bodies, for our genes to be able to switch on and off. It is also really important for our bodies so that we can metabolize histamine. So if we're looking at why we might be dealing with POTS in the first place, if it is histamine related, then MTHFR, along with some other genetic variants that I'll mention here in a second, could be a really big piece of the puzzle. Other genetic variants that are worth mentioning as far as genetic variants that inhibit methylation would be COMT, having a slow COMT or a fast COMT, that's COMT, or MTHRR. There are other genetic variants as well, but these are the ones that I see most commonly in our population. So what can you do about it? First of all, I think it would be important to test for these genetic variants, and a naturopathic doctor might be more prone to help you get said test. It would also be important in that scenario to test B vitamin levels so that over-supplementation of B vitamins is not happening. So I personally take methylfolate, and I also take folinic acid, not folic, right? That's the man-made version that oftentimes we cannot process very well, folinic acid. I take both. I use the brand Seeking Health. I love them. They're lozenges that you can just put into your mouth and allow them to dissolve. I actually feel significantly better when I am having methylfolate and folinic acid in my supplement regimen. But here's the thing. We can often be sensitive to methylfolate. Because if we have that slow COMT genetic variant, that means that we can actually be really sensitive to methyl in the first place. And B vitamins are high in histamine, so we can be really sensitive to them if we're having histamine response issues. Oftentimes, what I see work really well for a lot of our clients when they're working with our doctor, when they're working with a registered dietitian, is that they start out with stabilizing their mast cells and their histamine response first. And that can take a long time. That can take a half year, it can take a year, it can take a while. But then after they have gotten some substantial progress in that, then slowly and incrementally building in B vitamins that are methylated. So when I did this personally, I started with that 800 mcg lozenge of methylfolate. I divided it into 4s. So I'm starting with 200 mcg. I started there and I paid attention. Do I feel more anxious, more depressed? Do I have more symptoms upon taking this? So I'm not starting it with all these other medications and supplements. I'm starting it singularly by itself so I can pay attention to how my body responds. If it responds well, great, then I can slowly titrate up as my body says go. And if I'm anxious, when I start getting into the 400 or the 600 mcg, I would personally back it up because that is a sign for many of us that we're not tolerating it well. What's really interesting is if you do have MTHFR and you're not supplementing and you're not getting enough folate, anxiety is also a symptom of folate deficiency. So either way, if you're too low or too high, anxiety can be a symptom. And then once I got to 800 mcg, I moved on to adding in the folinic acid lozenge, and I started the same way with 200 mcg, then 400, then 600, then 800. And now I'm at both of them, 800 mcg each, and I'm loving it because I do feel significantly better with my POTS symptoms when I take them. Reminder that a lot of what I'm sharing here, even though there are some studies to back them, we need more studies, we need more diversity in our studies, we need more funding towards more research, okay? So a lot of what I'm sharing is anecdotal. A lot of what my clients do is they symptom test and they see how they respond, how their symptoms respond. I am certainly not saying that this is a one-size-fits-all. Instead, I'm opening up the curiosity and saying this worked for me, this works for many others. So I'm curious if it could work for you too. Unfortunately, it has to be that way right now because these conditions are just barely starting to get attention from the medical industry, which is frustrating and unfortunate, which I'm sure many of us have faced. So much gaslighting that it's wild. It's wild. Next up is gut health. So with gut health, there can be a few things going on. Oftentimes, people with POTS have more likelihood to have something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And along with SIBO, oftentimes comes candida overgrowth. Why does this happen? And how can you know if you're dealing with this too? Oftentimes with SIBO, we get bloating, and that bloating can happen after we have cruciferous vegetables, such as broccoli. There is actually an unofficial test called the broccoli test, where you have a bowl of broccoli and you see if you have significant bloating afterwards, and that could potentially point to having SIBO. Unfortunately, tests for SIBO are typically unreliable, so we can talk to our doctors about it, but it is tricky to be able to get true answers for this. Bacteria in the gut attracts yeast. So candida yeast can tend to explode in our systems as well, and we can have too much of that because it's attracted to that excess of bacteria in the gut. Okay, but why does this happen for us? Dysautonomia, which POTS is a form of dysautonomia, dysfunctional autonomic nervous system, can cause dysmotility, slow motility of the gut. And you better believe I'll put the link to the study for that as well. So when you have slow motility of the gut, that can lead to SIBO. Many people with POTS don't even know that they have SIBO. They just know that they get bloated easily. It doesn't really feel like they're digesting food properly. Maybe they have a lack of hunger cues. Maybe they crave simple carbohydrates and sugar. They have excessive fatigue, which of course POTS can cause, but these gut health issues can exacerbate that greatly. But here's the feedback loop. SIBO can cause things like nutrient deficiencies. You're not absorbing nutrients properly, which can escalate your POTS symptoms. So we tend to go through this cycle of escalation with POTS symptoms and gut health issues. Another thing that can happen is that mast cells live within the connective tissue of your gut lining. So if you are having POTS symptoms because of histamine issues from your mast cells, and you have these gut health issues, they could be exacerbating your histamine issues. It's such a loop, it's such a feedback loop. So there's a lot that could be going on here. So oftentimes if you go to your doctor about SIBO, you'll go through a kill-off protocol to kill off that bacterial overgrowth, to kill off the yeast overgrowth. But if you're not getting to the root of why it's happening in the first place, then you might get stuck in a cycle of SIBO, which actually happens for many of us. So for me personally, what I did about this was I started with stabilizing my mast cells, stabilizing my histamine response, because again, that's what I found to be the most prevalent piece of my POTS puzzle causing POTS symptoms. And if I wouldn't have done that first in the order of operations, then I likely would have gotten stuck in a cycle of SIBO and candida overgrowth recurring and just making things worse. After stabilizing my mast cells, which again, that took some time, then really focusing on stabilizing my POTS symptoms with the steps that I'm going to be talking about in these next sections. And then eventually building in antimicrobial like oil of oregano, which is also antifungal. Another option for this is the GI Detox Binder by Biocide and Botanicals. But for me, I took oil of oregano, and along with oil of oregano, I personally took fulvic and humic acid, which not only acts as a binder, but also has 52 essential minerals for the mineral deficiency that I was dealing with personally, likely because of those gut health issues that were making it difficult for me to absorb nutrients. Especially with gut health supplements, it is not a one-size-fits-all. I see that a lot of people get exacerbation of symptoms when they take certain supplements, so this really is between you and your doctor, what you choose to do, listening to your body. For me personally, I did the oil of oregano for about 4 weeks, and I do the fulvic and humic acid ongoing because I find that it's actually one of the most helpful supplements that I take in my regimen. And that brings us to nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies can be a huge piece of the POTS puzzle. So oftentimes, we're not getting enough of certain things, and that can be because of those gut health issues that we talked about. It can also be because of sensitivity to gluten, or even undiagnosed celiac disease, which can accompany POTS in some cases. So for me personally, I make sure that I'm taking a really good multivitamin. I'm getting the iron that I need, I'm getting the vitamin C that I need, I'm getting my minerals through that fulvic and humic acid. I make sure that I'm also trying to eat a whole foods diet where I am eating nutrient-dense foods. So hopefully at all angles, I'm getting more and more of the nutrients that I need. Again, with multivitamins, I would personally make sure that there is no folic acid inside of that multivitamin. If anything, I would go for one that has methylfolate if I tolerate it well. And that brings us to nutrition. The Cleveland Clinic states that the protocol for POTS is to eat frequently every 2 to 3 hours with higher fat and more protein and more moderation in carbs, making sure the carbs are complex. Again, this isn't one size fits all because a lot of us, if we eat foods, we feel worse because we're sensitive to those foods. So again, if they're triggering our mast cells, if we eat every 2 to 3 hours, we could feel really terrible. And for some of us, maybe dysmotility of the gut is so bad that we're dealing with gastroparesis, which is so severe, and if you're dealing with it, I'm sorry. A sign of that might be something like IBS symptoms, or cyclical vomiting, or really feeling like you're not digesting food at all when you eat it, and you can't tolerate eating very well. Those might be signs of delayed gastric emptying, gastroparesis, essentially paralysis of the gut. Again, that might be caused by our POTS symptoms because POTS can lead to dysmotility, and gastroparesis is essentially the most severe form of dysmotility. And if we're dealing with that and you tell a person with gastroparesis to eat fat every 2 to 3 hours, they will feel awful. So this really is personalized to each person, and it's something that you and your medical team, or you and your dietitian, you can even come to the dietitian on staff in my program and come to a group session there. Make sure that you have support in making decisions specifically for you. But for me, I feel best when I eat every 2 to 3 hours with protein and fat, just like the Cleveland Clinic said. A lot of people hear that and they think keto. I'm not saying keto. Actually, I feel terrible with keto. I'm just saying that for me personally, focusing on that blood sugar regulation is key. Foods that make me feel best are, surprisingly, a mozzarella cheese stick, salted steak. As far as vegetables go, I do really well with cooked romaine lettuce. Orgain protein shake, which is not for everybody because it has erythritol among other things in it. But for me personally, Orgain protein shake with no superfoods feels pretty good when I drink it. And the question that I ask myself when I have symptoms is basically, what did I just eat within the last hour? Or how long has it been since I've eaten, since I can really experience a crash if I don't eat frequently enough? When I eat a food, I'm looking for, does it bring more blood flow to my brain? Because if you have POTS, you probably know the feeling of feeling like you're not getting enough blood to the brain. We can lose our color, we can kind of get really droopy, we can lose our ability to think clearly. It's not a good feeling. So when I eat something, I'm looking for, does this feel like it brings more blood flow to my brain, and does that sustain for an hour or more? Because we could eat sugar and then feel like we get more blood to the brain and then we lose it pretty quickly and we crash. But I'm looking for, does this food bring more blood flow to my brain and then sustain me? If something makes me feel more fatigued within that hour of eating it, then I'm pretty sure that I might not be responding well to that food. But I don't need to get it perfectly, because food is really personal and it's an emotional relationship. And many of us have disordered eating in our histories, so we do not need to get things perfect or make sure that everything's exactly right or get overwhelmed or get stressed about it. We can just start being curious about it and start being scientists collecting data, wondering what foods might help us stabilize more than others, knowing that everybody's going to be different. So your foods might be the same as mine, but they might be different. Another thing that I've just recently done, because as you may know from my other video, I was in remission of POTS for several years, multiple times in a row, and then I've been out of remission multiple times as well. This last time I hit perimenopause early. And I came out of remission and I was in bed for a few weeks because yes, I have been disabled with POTS multiple times, like really disabled. And I went gluten-free because there are studies pointing to potential connection between gluten and POTS. And I also started getting a little bumpy rash on my elbows when I would eat certain foods. And I did some research and found that that can actually be a sign of celiac disease, which I never would have thought. That's just mind-blowing to me. Here's the thing, I went gluten-free before getting tested, and so now I can't really test for celiac disease because you have to be eating gluten for 3 months consecutively for the test to be accurate. But I don't want to be in bed, so I'm just not even going to deal with it. I'm just not going to eat gluten. I'm not going to eat anything that touches gluten, and it significantly improved my symptoms. I had tried gluten-free in the past, but I wasn't eating as somebody with celiac disease. Could there be traces of gluten in this restaurant food? Is there any potential touching to the bread that might have happened? I wasn't paying attention to traces, and so I still was likely getting gluten even though I was technically eating gluten-free foods. I now have changed that and I've seen a significant difference, and I'm curious if you might see the same. Who knows? We're all different, and so it could potentially cause some improvements and it could not. True hydration is also very important for us because we tend to have low blood volume oftentimes. We tend to be hypovolemic. With that, it's often recommended that we have a lot of salt and that we have a lot of water so that we can up our blood volume. I have heard some people are recommended to drink Gatorade, like they go to their appointment and they're like, oh, you have POTS, drink lots of Gatorade. I personally would never do that because we tend to be so sensitive to sugar, and maybe we feel better in the moment, but then within that hour to 2 hour mark, we crash and it sets us up for more dysregulation. I'm not saying that that's everybody, but it's many of us. So even though sugar is helpful for helping that hydration reach the same viscosity as our blood, it probably wouldn't be helpful for many of us. It's not helpful for me personally over the long term. Yes, it might help us feel better for a moment, but then it can escalate symptoms overall if we have a lot of sugar and simple carbohydrates. Again, not saying that that's everybody, but tends to be the case for many of us. So what I do personally is I kind of alternate. I tend to go through drinking a lot of water. I actually have this here with me. I try to go through 3 to 4 of these a day. I have used Buoy, which is a relatively new company that makes electrolyte drops. I do really well with them. They don't have any artificial sweeteners. This is not sponsored, by the way, but sometimes it does cause gut issues for me, so it's kind of on and off with them. Sometimes I do like lemon water with salt in it. That could be helpful too. And then sometimes I'm just feeling great and I don't actually feel like I'm hypovolemic, and so I don't do high salt. I just kind of eat a regular diet. So it really tends to come and go along with symptoms. Now let's move on to exercise. For exercise, for me, I really like to build muscle. I personally like to do strength training, and I don't love cardio. I will be the first person to say I do not love cardio. I actually hate it. I used to be a long distance runner. I used to love that, but now long distance running on a flat surface is not super helpful for my pelvis after having babies because I have EDS. I really try to listen to what my body likes to do. I am going to be doing a video in the near future on how I am rebuilding into running, into trail running specifically, but that's not something that I do every day. I like to alternate my repetitive motions. I like to alternate my exercises so that I'm not doing the same thing over and over again, because the next position is the best position for us. I also have been playing around with swimming, which I find to be incredibly therapeutic, but not the most fun thing in the world to me personally. I've also been playing around with different exercise videos where it's low impact cardio work. I really enjoy HIIT instead of like long intervals of endurance type cardio. I really enjoy HIIT training. It's really important to listen to which exercises actually feel good. Physically, don't injure me, right? That's really important, not to push past injury or pain. So all of that to say, having muscle mass, incredibly important for many reasons, but also cardiorespiratory exercise is very important in POTS. So I try to force myself to work it in ways that I actually enjoy, and it's very imperfect. Sometimes it's not as consistent as I want, but I try to set small goals and then achieve them and then build on top of that. And I reach for imperfect consistency, not perfect. So let's get out of the 0 to 60 thinking and go from 0 to 100 and try to get it perfect, because then we will burn ourselves out typically. So I try to do it imperfectly and reward myself when I achieve even the smallest success. Weightlifting is a lot easier for me because I enjoy it. It's very fun and I like to feel strong. So we're all different, I suppose. And the next thing we'll go over is hormones. So again, like I mentioned, estrogen and progesterone can trigger our mast cells. So if that is a piece of the POTS picture for us, then that can really escalate symptoms when we have hormonal shifts. They can also increase laxity in the first place. So speaking of blood vessel laxity, that can increase with hormonal shifts as well. And if you're having hormonal shifts when pregnant, you've also got relaxin in the picture that's increasing. So typically we have kind of a lot going on with hormonal changes. So a lot of people experience POTS symptoms getting worse the week before their period. That's me specifically. Even 2 weeks before their period, or during the period, or right after the period, or during pregnancy, or during the postpartum phase. So all of these different hormonal shifts can really trigger POTS symptoms and can completely change the condition. It's such a dynamic condition. It can look one way for a while, and then it can look a different way, and we can have it all of our lives to one extent, and then we get pregnant, or then we have perimenopause, or then we go into menopause, and then it's completely different. It's important to note that even though it wasn't this way before, it can be this way after, and even though we improve, maybe we never go back to baseline, and that's okay. That's okay. We're looking for those small percentages of improvement. So with this, many of us can also have hormonal imbalances. Look on the Ehlers-Danlos Society website, they talk about endometriosis being in 33% of people with EDS. I also see in our program a high level of PCOS, which is something that I have myself, as well as thyroid issues. And even though PMDD is not a hormonal imbalance, PMDD can sometimes be histamine related, and it can actually be a histamine response to those hormonal changes. So those are just some of the things that maybe we might be dealing with. I personally have PCOS, and I remember initially going in to see my naturopath, and my naturopath said, "You have the highest level of testosterone that I've ever seen. Ever." Whoa. And that's probably the first moment that she started to believe me that something was wrong before I was even diagnosed with POTS. And working on those hormonal imbalances really helped. So for me specifically with PCOS, blood sugar regulation is huge because insulin resistance could be a big piece of the PCOS pie. But also, I started different supplements, io and chiroinositol, DIM. I started eating more vegetables that I tolerated well. Fish oil, which I know is a little bit controversial nowadays, but fish oil, high quality fish oil, chromium. Those are just some examples of what I personally took that really helped with my PCOS symptoms, and that also helped with my POTS symptoms. It also helped me to lose weight, and I hate to say that because there's this stigma out there where basically anytime that you go to the doctor, you need to lose weight or you need to gain weight. It's all about weight, and it's like, no, this is not the main problem, and no, maybe I don't need to do that. Like, that should not be the go-to, and it's just become a way of medical gaslighting. But I am saying for me specifically, since I have insulin resistance, losing weight when I was a weight that wasn't super comfortable for me and didn't feel good for me, insulin sensitivity improved, and that improved my PCOS. So that was just something that personally helped me, but again, I need to like smack some people across the face who keep being like, you just need to lose weight. You just need to lose weight. Like, no, thank you very much. That's not the main problem here. And there you have it. There's our video about how I personally put my POTS into remission, imperfectly, and I hope that it was helpful. I went deep. If you can't tell, I'm autistic. Maybe you can't tell because it is hard to tell for me. I tend to dig very deep, and this is my special interest as well, if you can't tell, so it's something that thousands of hours of research have gone into this specific topic, as well as seeing, again, we've had 10,000 members in our program, more than that now, so being able to see the pattern recognition across the board and being able to find associated studies and being able to see what works in myself, it's just, to me, a very fun puzzle. I hope that someday it could become a fun puzzle for you as well as you start to feel better, because when you're not feeling great, it's not fun. I hope that this was helpful, that it was interesting, and that it gave you some helpful tools for you to follow. I will see you next time, and I want you to know you are stronger than you may feel right now, and it is possible to feel better. Bye.